This contract is void.
Gregory, no, stop it.
Tearing the paper changes nothing. What are you doing here, Naomi?
My name is Naomi Brooks, and I need to tell you about the morning two security guards walked me through a marble lobby in downtown Atlanta like I was a shoplifter caught with merchandise stuffed in my coat. I was 51 years old. I was wearing a cardigan I'd owned since my sister was still alive. And pressed against my chest was a folder holding the papers that were supposed to turn a promise I made at my sister's hospital bed into $22 million of real, permanent, unstoppable good. Nobody in that building believed the folder was real. Nobody believed the money was real. A few of them, if I'm honest, didn't believe I was allowed to be standing in that lobby at all. It started with a man named Gregory Pierce looking at my driver's license like it was evidence in a crime he hadn't solved yet. It ended with the chief executive officer of one of the largest private wealth firms in the Southeast stepping off an elevator, looking straight at me and saying my name like it belonged to someone he respected. It did, more than Gregory Pierce could have imagined. But to understand how a quiet woman in a 15-year-old Toyota ended up standing in the middle of that lobby with the whole office watching, you have to go back to my sister, Denise Brooks. Because none of what happened in that building makes any sense without her. Denise was 7 years older than me, and for most of my childhood, she was less like a sibling and more like a second mother. Our own mother worked doubles at a laundry service on the west side of Atlanta, and our father wasn't around long enough for me to remember much beyond a door closing. So it was Denise who braided my hair before school. Denise who taught me to write my name in cursive at the kitchen table, holding my hand steady over the loops until I got the D right. Denise who told me, more times than I can count, that the way people treat you when they think you have nothing tells you everything about their character. She became a labor and delivery nurse. She never married, never had kids of her own, but half the kids in our neighborhood called her Aunt Denise anyway, and she showed up to their birthdays with cake she'd baked herself instead of bought. She drove the same beat-up Honda for almost 20 years, the kind with a passenger door you had to slam twice. She packed her lunch in the same blue bag until the zipper finally gave out, and she just started folding the top over instead of replacing it. You'd have never known, looking at her, that she had money. That was on purpose. She paid rent for families she barely knew when the water got shut off. She bought winter coats in bulk every November and left them in church pews and hospital break rooms, places where somebody would find them and never know who to thank. I used to ask her why she didn't treat herself to something nice, and she'd just laugh and say, "Baby, nice doesn't fill anybody's stomach but mine." I became a teacher's aide, then spent years at a community center helping kids with their reading. Modest jobs, modest paychecks. I drove a Toyota Highlander with a cracked windshield I never got around to fixing, and I loved that truck like it owed me nothing and gave me everything. Denise and I built our lives around the same quiet rule. You don't need people to know what you have, you just need to know what you're worth. That rule worked fine for decades. Then Denise got sick. I don't talk about our mother as much as I talk about Denise, mostly because Denise raised me day to day. But she deserves a moment here too. Gwendolyn Brooks worked at that commercial laundry service for almost 30 years, pressing sheets and uniforms for hotels and hospitals across the city, her hands cracked from industrial detergent no amount of lotion ever fully fixed. She used to tell us, when we complained about being tired from school, that tired was a luxury she didn't get to have. I didn't understand what she meant until I was much older. She meant some people get to be tired and stop. Other people have to be tired and keep going anyway, because nobody else is going to keep the lights on. One Christmas, when I was maybe 9, a manager at the laundry service accused her of stealing a coat that had gone missing from the lost and found. A coat another employee had simply taken home by mistake and returned the next week without so much as an apology. My mother lost 2 days of pay. while they investigated. Nobody investigated the other employee for a single minute. She never got an apology either. She went back to work the next day like nothing had happened because she had 2 daughters at home, and a laundry service didn't pay severance for pride. She passed when I was in my 30s, never knowing what Denise was quietly building, never knowing any of us would end up anywhere near $22 million. I like to think she'd have kept working at that laundry service anyway, out of pure stubborn habit. That was who she was, who she made us. Here's what almost nobody knew, including me, until the last year of my sister's life. When Denise was 26, fresh out of nursing school, she had a roommate named Carol Ann Whitfield, who was scraping together money to start a small medical supply company out of her garage. Nothing glamorous, just better designs for basic hospital equipment. Denise believed in her. So when Carol Ann couldn't make rent one month and then another, Denise quietly covered her for almost 2 years, never asking for a dime back. Carol Ann never forgot it. When the company finally got off the ground, she handed Denise a small percentage of ownership. A gesture, really, neither of them expecting it to mean much. Except that little company grew, and almost 30 years later, a much larger healthcare corporation bought it out for an enormous amount of money. Denise's forgotten percentage turned into more than either of us had ever imagined touching in our lifetimes. And what did my sister do with it? She kept working 12-hour shifts. She kept driving that same old Honda. She told almost nobody, not our cousins, not her closest coworkers, not even me. For years, she just quietly reinvested it and kept living exactly the way she always had. It wasn't until the cancer came back the second time, about 1.5 years before she passed, that she finally told me everything, sitting in that hospital room with the monitors beeping steady behind her. I don't want a foundation with my name slapped on some building nobody remembers, she told me, her voice thin but her eyes sharp as ever. I want scholarships, nursing students, teachers, kids from our old neighborhood who don't have anybody telling them they're capable of more. She made me promise $22 million, structured right, protected right, given away right. In her name, for people like the ones who raised us, I promised her. And on a Tuesday morning, 11 months after she passed, I put on my good cardigan, grabbed the folder my attorney had prepared, and drove my old Highlander into downtown Atlanta to keep that promise. I spent most evenings that last year in a plastic chair beside Denise's hospital bed, the kind that never gets comfortable no matter how you angle it, listening to machines that beeped on their own private schedule. Some nights she was sharp as ever, cracking jokes about the hospital food, asking about kids from the community center like she still had somewhere to be. Other nights, the medication pulled her under early, and I'd just sit there watching her breathe, thinking about every Christmas coat she'd left in a church pew and never told a soul about. "You're gonna do this right," she told me one night, gripping my hand harder than I expected for someone that sick. Not flashy, not for show. Quiet, the way I did it. "You understand me?" I told her I understood. She held my eyes a second longer, like she wasn't fully convinced, then let it go with a small laugh. "You always were the one who listened." Toward the end, she talked less about the money and more about the people it was for. A boy she'd delivered 20 years earlier who wanted to go to nursing school himself. A teacher's aid program that had shut down for lack of funding. Kids she used to see in the waiting room whose mothers couldn't afford the bus fare home. She never once mentioned wanting her name on anything. She mentioned wanting her name to matter to people who'd never met her. There's a difference, and by the end of those months, I understood it the way you only understand something when you've watched somebody live it all the way to the finish. She went in early October, on a Thursday, with the window cracked because she always said hospital air felt like it had never touched anything alive. I was holding her hand when it happened, The same hand that used to hold mine over cursive letters at our kitchen table. And I remember thinking, in that strange sideways way your mind works in moments like that I still owed her a thank you I'd never quite gotten around to saying out loud. So I said it anyway, right there, even though I wasn't sure she could still hear me. "Thank you for raising me," I told her. "Thank you for teaching me what quiet means when it's a choice instead of a silence." I don't know if she heard that. I choose to believe she did. The room was quiet after, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. And a nurse I didn't recognize came in gently to help with the next steps. And somewhere in the hallway, another family was starting a shift change like the rest of the world hadn't just stopped turning for a minute. It took me almost a year to open the folder my attorney had prepared, not because I doubted the promise, but because opening it meant admitting she was really gone. And grief moves at its own pace no matter how much money is waiting on the other side of it. I should tell you, this wasn't the first time somebody decided who I was before I'd said enough words to earn that judgment. A few years back, I went to buy a car, and a salesman spent 40 minutes steering me toward the oldest, highest mileage vehicle on the lot, walking me through financing like I'd never balanced a checkbook in my life. When I told him I intended to pay in full, in cash, he laughed, like I'd made a joke. I hadn't. Around 15 years ago, I walked into a bank to open a simple savings account, and a teller asked me more than once whether I understood the account had a minimum balance requirement, in a tone she'd have never used on somebody in a blazer. At that point, I had more sitting in a retirement account than she likely made in 3 years combined. She had no way of knowing that, and she didn't bother finding out. She just decided. None of those moments were as dramatic as what happened at Harlow and Vance. I brushed most of them off within the hour and hardly thought about them again. But a lifetime of small moments like that adds up into something. Not bitterness, exactly. More like readiness. By the time Gregory Pierce decided I must be lying about $22 million, I wasn't shocked. I was hurt. But I already knew how to keep my hands steady while somebody tore my dignity to pieces, because I'd had a lot of practice with smaller versions of the exact same insult. The firm was called Harlow and Vance Private Wealth, and their downtown office took up 3 floors of a glass tower just off Peachtree Street. I circled the parking garage twice before I found a spot my Highlander could actually fit into, and I laughed to myself in the elevator. Because the last time I'd been in a building that shiny, I was dropping off a permission slip for a school field trip. I checked in at the front desk a few minutes before 10. The appointment had been set for weeks, not with just anybody, but directly with the Chief Executive Officer, Daniel Vance. His own executive assistant had confirmed it twice by phone. The young woman at the desk, whose name tag read Ashley Mercer, was polite enough. She asked me to take a seat, told me someone would be right with me, offered me coffee from a machine that looked more complicated than my truck's dashboard. I said thank you and sat by the window, folder in my lap, looking out over a city my sister and I had grown up watching, change from a distance. I hadn't done anything unusual. I hadn't raised my voice. And still, before I'd said more than a dozen words, I could feel eyes on me. Employees walking past glanced twice. A man in a navy suit near the elevator bank was watching me a little too long over the rim of his glasses. That was Gregory Pierce, the branch director. In about 4 minutes, he was going to walk over, introduce himself, and decide on his own, without checking a single thing, that I didn't belong in that building. I remember every mile of that drive, which is strange because it was a route I could have driven with my eyes closed. I took the surface streets instead of the highway, past the community center where I used to teach kids their sight words, past the block where our old apartment used to be before they tore it down for condos, past the cemetery. Though I didn't stop that day, I just slowed down at the light and looked toward the section where Denise and our mother were buried. The folder sat on the passenger seat the whole way, seatbelt buckled around it like it was a person. I remember thinking that was a little foolish, buckling in a folder and doing it anyway. I had the radio off. I wanted the quiet. I kept running through what I'd say to Daniel Vance when I saw him, even though I already knew him. Even though there was no reason to be nervous about a man who used to ask about my mother by name every time I came in to check my account balance. I wasn't nervous about Daniel. I didn't know, yet that I should have been nervous about everyone standing between his office and that front door. Gregory Pierce crossed that lobby like a man used to being the most important person in any room he entered. Mid-50s, silver at the temples, a watch that probably cost more than my truck. He looked me over, not at me, over me, the way you'd size up furniture somebody left in the wrong spot. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" "Not good morning. Not are you being helped." "I have a 10 o'clock appointment," I said. "With Mr. Vance." "With Daniel Vance? Our CEO?" "Yes, sir." He glanced at Ashley, who was already pulling up the schedule, and I watched him decide there had to be a mistake before he'd even looked at a screen. "I think there's some confusion," he said. "Do you have identification?" I handed him my license without an argument. I've had a lot of practice not arguing at moments like that. He studied it far longer than a license requires studying, flipped it over once like he expected an answer written on the back. "And you're here regarding a trust transfer," I said. $22 million. I have all the documentation with me." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was the look of a man who'd just decided with total confidence exactly what kind of morning he was about to have. I heard the first comment before I saw who said it. A low voice near the coffee station, pitched just loud enough to reach me. Probably hear about some inheritance scam. They love these places downtown for that. I didn't turn around. Turning around just gives people the satisfaction of watching you react. Ashley Mercer heard it too. Her jaw went tight, and I could tell she wanted to say something to her coworkers, but at 28, new in her role, calling out colleagues in front of a client felt like more risk than she could afford. A few minutes later, she came back, clipboard pressed to her chest. "Ms. Brooks, I'm so sorry for the wait. Can I ask what the appointment's regarding, so I can pull the right file?" I explained it again. The trust, the $22 million, the meeting with Vance himself. I watched her do math in her head that wasn't adding up the way she expected. "Let me go check on that," she said, and disappeared toward the back. She was gone almost 10 minutes. When she came back, her face had changed. "I found the appointment," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "It's just, Mr. Pierce wants to verify a few things first." "Can I get you anything while you wait?" she asked. "Water, maybe?" "I'm fine," I told her. "Thank you, though. You're the only one who's asked." She gave me a small, uncomfortable smile, like she wanted to say more but wasn't sure she was allowed. I found out later, from what she told investigators, that she'd already pulled up my appointment by then. Seen it flagged as a personal meeting with Daniel Vance, marked high priority, confirmed twice. She'd already tried to tell Gregory that. He'd waved her off. "I'll handle it," he told her. "Something doesn't add up here, and I'm not letting $22 million walk out the door on a hunch." Not everyone in that building chose silence. A security guard named Curtis Odom, 60-some years old, had been stationed near the front doors the whole morning, and I noticed him watching the situation build, his face growing more uncomfortable with every passing minute, the way someone looks when they're watching a mistake happen in slow motion and don't have the authority to stop it. At one point, he walked over to Gregory and spoke low enough that I only caught pieces of it. Something like, "You sure about this? Seems like a lot of trouble over paperwork nobody's actually checked yet." "I appreciate the concern, Curtis," Gregory said, brushing him off the way he'd brushed off everyone else that morning. "I've got it handled." Curtis glanced my way afterward, and I saw something in his face that was almost an apology, though he never said the word. He stayed closer after that than his post technically required, and when the police did arrive, he was the one who quietly told the officers where I'd been sitting the entire time, calm and cooperative, before Gregory had a chance to frame the story his own way. It wasn't much. He didn't stop what happened, but he tried, in the small way available to him. And months later, when I came back for a quarterly meeting, I made a point of thanking him, myself. He seemed embarrassed by it, waved it off, said he was just doing his job. I told him plenty of people do a lot less than their job requires when it's inconvenient. He just nodded and went back to his post by the door. Around the 1-hour mark, a woman in a gray blazer with a badge that read PATRICIA NKEMELU, Compliance, walked briskly through the lobby, saw the commotion, and stopped. "What's going on here?" For a second, I actually thought it might be over. Ashley lit up with relief. "Ms. NKEMELU, this client has a confirmed appointment with Mr. Vance, and Mr. Pierce has concerns about the documentation, but I checked and everything matches." "Let me see the file," Patricia said, reaching for it. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her face shifting. "I have to take this. Building compliance emergency upstairs." She looked at Ashley. "Get Gregory to call it in properly. Page me the second it's resolved." And she was gone, taking with her the one real chance, for now, of someone with actual authority looking at the facts. Gregory almost looked relieved. "See?" he said to no one in particular. "Even compliance doesn't have time for this." That wasn't remotely what had just happened. By then, I understood the truth of that morning, and the story being told about it were drifting further apart with every minute. Sitting there, I found myself thinking about a day almost 20 years earlier, when Denise had taken me with her to a hospital administration office to fix an error in her paycheck. A different building, a different city block, but a familiar feeling. The way a young administrator looked at her scrubs, her tired eyes, and decided without asking a single question that she must have made the mistake herself. Denise hadn't raised her voice that day either. I remember watching her, 22 years old myself at the time, amazed at how steady she stayed while a man half convinced himself she was trying to steal $400 from her own employer. "You let them see you get small," she told me afterward, sitting in her car in that parking lot. "And they'll remember you as small forever. You stay exactly as big as you already are, and eventually the truth catches up to the room." I hadn't thought about that conversation in years, but sitting in that lobby, folder in my lap, listening to Gregory's footsteps disappear toward the back office with my documents, I heard her voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside me. So I stayed exactly as big as I already was. I didn't apologize for taking up space. I didn't shrink my voice to make anyone more comfortable. I sat there, spine straight, hands steady, and waited for the truth to catch up to the room. Close to an hour and 15 minutes past my appointment time, Gregory came back out with my folder in his hand, his face already set. "Ms. Brooks," he said. "No ma'am this time. No softness at all. I've looked through what you brought, and I have serious concerns about the legitimacy of these documents." "They're notarized," I said, keeping my voice even. My attorney prepared every page, his number's right there on the letterhead. Anyone can print a letterhead. I felt the heat climb up my neck, but I held it. "You're welcome to call him, right now. It takes 5 minutes." "I think it would be best," Gregory said, "if you gathered your things and left the premises. We take financial fraud very seriously here." Financial fraud. Loud enough that 3 more employees turned to look. Ashley stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Mr. Pierce, I already checked. The appointment's real. Can we just call upstairs before this goes any further? Gregory looked at her for a long second. I actually thought he might reach for his phone. Ashley, he said, I've been doing this job since before you graduated college. I think I can tell the difference between a real transaction and somebody trying to take advantage of this firm. But the system shows that's enough. She flinched and went quiet. Robert Klein, a senior advisor, walked past near the elevator bank and asked if everything was all right. Gregory told him it was handled. Robert nodded and kept walking. Another chance. Gone. Mr. Pierce, I said, one more time, as steady as I could manage. Please, call my attorney. Call Mr. Vance's office. I'm asking you respectfully one last time. I know what a legitimate client looks like, he said. He looked at me the way you look at something you've already made up your mind about. Whatever happened next was going to happen the hard way. What I'm going to do, Gregory said, raising his voice so the whole lobby could hear, is treat this the way we treat any attempt to defraud this firm. I saw Ashley step forward, mouth opening, and I saw him shoot her a look sharp enough to close it right back up. Every phone at the coffee station went still. These documents, he said, holding up my folder, are not going anywhere near this firm's systems until I've confirmed they're not fabricated. Then he tore them. Not once. Twice. The trust papers. The notarized signatures. My attorney's letter. Months of careful work, ripped down the middle in a marble lobby. The sound of it far louder than it had any right to be. Sir, I said, and my voice finally cracked. Not from fear. From something closer to grief. Those were the only originals my attorney gave me this morning. Then your attorney can print more. Flat, like he'd already moved past it. Ashley dropped to her knees and started gathering the pieces off the floor, hands shaking, mouthing, I'm sorry, without seeming to know she was doing it. For a second, I honestly didn't know if there was a way back from this. If the transfer could even move forward without those originals, if a year and a half of careful legal work had just been shredded on a marble floor over one man's pride. I stood there holding what was left of that folder and made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. Not there. Not in front of him. I was going to stay exactly as calm as Denise would have wanted, and let this man's own behavior be the thing that condemned him. Gregory stepped a few feet away and made a call, low and urgent. A couple minutes later, he turned back to me. I've called the police, he said. I believe you're attempting to commit fraud against this institution, and I'm not willing to take that risk. The floor tilted a little under me, not because I was afraid I hadn't done anything wrong and I knew it, but because of what it meant that a grown man in a position of authority looked at a quiet 51-year-old woman with a folder of legal paperwork and decided the right response was law enforcement. You called the police, I repeated, because I brought paperwork to a scheduled meeting. I called the police because something doesn't add up, and it's my job to protect this firm. Nearly every employee on that floor had stopped pretending not to watch. I could see doubt creeping into a few of their faces now. Not everyone, but a few. Like they were starting to wonder if their branch director had made a mistake nobody was going to be able to walk back. Ashley stood off to the side, still clutching the torn pages, watching the whole thing unravel with an expression I can only call horrified. 10 minutes later, 2 Atlanta police officers walked through the front doors. Officer Maria Delgado listened to Gregory's version first. A woman came in claiming a multi-million-dollar appointment, produced documents he found suspicious, became agitated when questioned. Agitated. I hadn't raised my voice once. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened here? Delgado asked, not unkindly. I told her, calm, clear, exact. The appointment, The identification I'd handed over without hesitation, the documents torn in front of witnesses, the refusal to make a single phone call that could have cleared everything up in minutes. I gave her my attorney's name and number and asked her directly to call him. While she wrote it down, Gregory cut in. I'd like her escorted off the property while this is sorted out, for the safety of our staff. Safety from a woman sitting quietly in a chair. I watched Delgado's jaw tighten, like she was already forming her own opinion about who the real problem in that lobby might be. She told me later, once the whole thing was behind us, that Gregory's story had bothered her almost immediately. Not because of anything I'd said, but because of small cracks in his own account. He'd said I became agitated, yet every witness she interviewed afterward, including employees with no particular loyalty to me, described me as calm, even unusually so. He'd also mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd torn the documents to prevent them from being used fraudulently, a detail she wrote down word for word because it struck her as backwards. Destroying evidence, she told me, is not how you prevent fraud. It's usually the opposite, but procedure is procedure. And in the moment she asked me, politely, to step outside with her partner while they sorted things out. So I stood. I smoothed my cardigan, and I walked toward those glass doors with a police officer at my side, past employees who wouldn't meet my eyes, past Ashley Mercer, who looked like she might cry, past Gregory Pierce, who looked for the first time all morning satisfied. The walk from that chair to the front doors was maybe 20 feet. It felt considerably longer. I could hear my own footsteps against the marble, unnaturally loud, and I could feel every head in that lobby turning to watch a woman being walked out by police, drawing conclusions without a single fact to support them. I kept my chin level. I kept my pace even. I was maybe 8 feet from the door when the elevator chimed behind me. The doors slid open, and a tall man in his early 60s stepped out mid-conversation, flanked by 2 assistants, laughing at something one of them had said. I recognized him immediately, even though I hadn't seen him in person in almost 8 years. Daniel Vance, the chief executive officer of Harlow and Vance, and the man who had personally opened my very first investment account back when I had a fraction of what I have now. His eyes swept the lobby the way people's eyes do when they're only half paying attention, then stopped. Right on me, standing beside a police officer, my cardigan rumpled, my folder in pieces in a young employee's arms. "Naomi?" he said, and the whole lobby went quiet at once. "Naomi Brooks?" Something in my chest finally let go. "Hello, Daniel," I said. He crossed that lobby faster than I'd ever seen a man in an expensive suit move, waving off his assistants, his eyes cutting from me to the officer to Gregory to the torn papers in Ashley's arms, piecing the whole scene together in real time. "What?" he said, his voice suddenly ice. "Is going on here?" Gregory opened his mouth, and for the first time all morning, nothing confident came out. "Mr. Vance," Gregory started, "there was a woman claiming to have an appointment with you, and given the amount involved, I felt it was necessary to... a woman." Daniel repeated slowly, like he was tasting how ugly the word sounded. "Gregory, this is Naomi Brooks. She has had an appointment with me personally for 3 weeks. I confirmed it myself, twice with my own assistant." He turned to me, his shoulders still rigid with anger, but his voice softening. "Naomi, I am so deeply sorry. Please come upstairs with me right now." "There's a small problem," I said, nodding toward Ashley, who stepped forward and held out the torn remains of my documents like evidence in a trial. "Mr. Pierce tore my paperwork and called the police." Daniel's face changed again, and this time there was nothing controlled about it. "You tore her documents," he said, each word measured and cold. "You called the police on her, and you never once picked up a phone to check with my office." The lobby was dead silent. Officer Delgado, a few feet away, was watching with an expression that told me she already knew exactly how this was going to end. "Sir, I was simply trying to protect the firm from..." "From what?" Daniel cut in. "A woman sitting quietly in a chair?" "You didn't protect this firm today, Gregory. You embarrassed it, in front of a police officer, in front of every employee on this floor. Hand your badge to security. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Don't come back until you hear from HR directly." I watched a man who'd spent an entire morning deciding what I was and wasn't capable of get walk toward the same doors he'd tried to walk me through. Except this time, nobody pretended it was for anyone's safety. The reactions in that lobby happened almost all at once, but I remember them separately, like snapshots. Ashley let out a breath she looked like she'd been holding for an hour, tears finally slipping down her face as she clutched the torn papers to her chest. A woman near the coffee station covered her mouth with both hands. Robert Klein, the senior advisor who'd walked past twice without stopping, stood frozen by the elevator bank, staring at the floor like he wished it would open up and take him somewhere else. Officer Delgado exchanged a look with her partner, then stepped toward Daniel. "Sir, given what's being described, I don't believe any crime was committed here, at least not by Ms. Brooks. If you'd like to file a complaint on her behalf regarding the destruction of documents, that's certainly within her rights." "We'll be discussing that," Daniel said, not taking his eyes off Gregory. I stood there, watching 1.5 years of grief and promise and quiet determination finally get seen for exactly what it was. And for the first time since I'd walked through those doors that morning, I let myself breathe all the way out. Daniel walked me to the elevator himself, his hand hovering near my shoulder like he wanted to make sure nobody else in that lobby got the chance to treat me as anything less than exactly who I was. Officer Delgado told me quietly she'd be filing a report regardless and handed me a card with her direct line in case I wanted to pursue anything over the destroyed documents. Upstairs, in an office overlooking half the city Denise and I grew up in, Daniel apologized more times than I could count. He called my attorney himself, on speakerphone, and had certified copies reissued within the hour, personally walking the paperwork through every step, refusing to let anyone else touch it. "Naomi," he said at one point, quieter now, "I'm going to make this right. Not just today. The whole culture that let today happen." I believed him, not because I trust institutions easily, but because I could see in the exhaustion on his face that this wasn't performance. This was a man genuinely ashamed of what his own building had allowed to happen under his name. By the end of that day, all $22 million was transferred exactly as Denise wanted, and the Denise Brooks Foundation existed, officially, for the very first time. The weeks that followed moved faster than I expected. Harlow and Vance launched a full internal investigation, pulling security footage, interviewing every employee who'd witnessed any part of that morning. Ashley Mercer's account, along with footage of Gregory tearing my documents in front of a room full of witnesses, made the outcome close to inevitable. Gregory Pierce was formally terminated 3 weeks later. He tried to argue wrongful termination, citing his years of service. That argument didn't get far, considering there was video of him destroying a client's legal paperwork and lying to police officers about why he'd called them. Officer Delgado followed up with me about 2 weeks after everything, asking whether I wanted to pursue anything further. A formal complaint over the destroyed documents, maybe even a civil claim. I thought about it seriously. I even talked to my attorney about what it might look like. In the end, I decided against going after Gregory personally. $22 million moving forward exactly as Denise intended was already more consequence than any settlement could add. What I asked for instead, through my attorney, was different. I asked that any future reference for Gregory Pierce be contingent on him completing a real program on implicit bias, not a checkbox video. Something with actual accountability built in. I don't know if it changed him. I have my doubts, but I wasn't interested in punishment for its own sake. I was interested in making sure the system around him changed, whether or not he personally did. Word got around the industry faster than I expected. Harlow and Vance issued a formal statement within a week, acknowledging what happened and outlining the changes being made, not naming me directly, out of respect for my privacy, but not hiding from what occurred either. A couple of local outlets picked up the story after an employee, not Ashley, mentioned it to a reporter covering workplace discrimination trends in Atlanta's financial sector. I made a choice early on not to do any interviews myself. This was never about being seen. It was about keeping a promise to my sister, and I didn't want that promise turned into a headline about me instead of a story about her. Daniel respected that completely. When reporters called asking for comment or access to me directly, his office simply said the client had requested privacy and left it there. What I did agree to was a short written statement, released through the firm, focused entirely on what mattered. I wrote that dignity shouldn't be conditional on what someone appears to have, and that I hoped no one else would ever have to fight to be believed the way I did that morning. I kept it short. I kept it about the lesson, not about me. I heard, secondhand, that Gregory Pierce struggled to find work at another firm for almost a year. Word travels fast in that industry, and video of a branch director tearing a client's legal documents and lying to police about it isn't the kind of thing a reference letter can smooth over. I won't pretend I felt nothing hearing that. Part of me, if I'm honest, felt something close to satisfaction. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you I'm above that feeling, because I'm not. But mostly what I felt was tired. Tired of how much energy an ordinary Tuesday morning had taken out of me. Tired of watching a grown man need an entire police response and a CEO's intervention to consider, for even a second, that he might be wrong about a woman in a cardigan. The implicit bias program my attorney negotiated on my behalf wasn't a small thing, whatever people assume about those programs. It ran for 6 months, with real accountability checkpoints. Not a single afternoon workshop with a certificate at the end. I don't know if it changed him. I've genuinely wondered. But I know it existed because I asked for it to exist. And that felt like a better use of my energy than spending years angry at one man who'd already told everyone in that lobby exactly who he was. About a month after everything happened, Daniel held a company-wide town hall, streamed to every Harlow and Vance office across the region. He didn't soften anything. He described what happened in that lobby in plain language, the torn documents, the unnecessary police call, the hour and a half a client sat waiting while employee after employee found reasons not to intervene. "I want to be honest with all of you," he said, looking straight into the camera. "This didn't happen because of one bad employee making one bad decision in isolation. It happened because a room full of people watched a colleague treat a client unfairly, and almost everyone in that room decided it wasn't their place to say anything. That's a culture problem. That's something every single one of us is responsible for fixing, starting today. He announced new verification protocols requiring staff to check the scheduling system before turning away any client with a confirmed appointment. He announced an escalation process, so a junior employee could flag a concern directly to compliance without needing a branch director's permission. Then he said the thing that stuck with me most. If a client walks through our doors looking like they don't belong here, that's exactly the moment we should be paying the closest attention. Not to whether they belong, because everyone belongs, but to whether we're about to fail them the way we failed someone last month. I don't know how much of that translated into permanent change at every branch. I'm honest enough to admit I can't fully know that. But it was said out loud to every employee at that firm, with his name attached to it. In my experience, that's actually fairly rare. I want to spend a little extra time on Ashley Mercer because she earned it. In the weeks after everything came out, it became clear just how much she'd tried to do right by me that morning, in a situation where she had almost no power to change the outcome. She'd checked the system. She'd flagged the appointment. She'd suggested more than once that someone simply call upstairs. She'd knelt on that marble floor and gathered the torn pieces of my documents like they still mattered. Because to her, they did. Daniel promoted her himself, 3 months later, into a new client advocacy role the firm created specifically because of what happened that day. A direct line for anyone who felt mistreated or dismissed by staff. I like to think she was the only person qualified for that job, because she was the only one in that building who'd actually behaved the way you'd hope everyone would. I've kept in touch with her since. She still gets a little emotional talking about that morning. I felt so powerless, she told me once over coffee. I knew something was wrong and I still couldn't stop it. You did more than almost everyone else in that room, I told her. And I meant it. Doing something imperfectly, under pressure, with limited power, still matters more than staying comfortably silent. I don't think Ashley needed that lesson from me, honestly. I think she already knew it. She just needed someone to tell her it counted. Robert Klein reached out to me about 2 months after everything, through the firm's front desk, asking if I'd be willing to take a call. I almost said no. He was the senior advisor who'd walked past that lobby twice, asked Gregory if everything was all right, and kept walking both times when he didn't like the answer he got. But I've never been the kind of person who refuses somebody the chance to say something difficult out loud. So I took the call. I've replayed that morning more times than I can count, he told me. And his voice didn't have any of the polish I imagined a senior advisor's voice usually had. I told myself it wasn't my department. I told myself Gregory had it handled. I want you to know those were excuses, not reasons, and I knew it even while I was making them. Why are you telling me this? I asked, not unkindly, genuinely curious. Because saying sorry to Ashley felt easy, he said. She did the right thing, so apologizing to her didn't cost me anything. Apologizing to you cost something, because I didn't do the right thing. And I think that's exactly why I needed to do it. I told him I appreciated that more than he probably realized. And I meant it. Not every apology needs to be dramatic to matter. Some of the most honest ones are just a grown man admitting quietly on a phone call nobody else heard that comfortable silence is still a choice. Setting up the Denise Brooks Foundation turned out to be its own kind of education. I'd spent my whole working life in classrooms and community centers, not boardrooms. And suddenly I was interviewing accountants and reading bylaws my attorney had to explain to me twice. I rented a small office above a bakery, not a glass tower, because I wanted the foundation to smell like cinnamon rolls instead of cologne and ambition. I hired a program director named Renee Ashford. a former guidance counselor who understood exactly what it meant for a kid to be told, gently but constantly, to aim lower than they were capable of. We spent the first 2 months just deciding what the application should ask for and what it shouldn't. Denise never wanted essays about hardship performed for a committee. She wanted to know what a student loved doing at 2 a.m. when nobody was grading them for it. So that became the first question on every application, right at the top. In plain language, I had a small, brass plate made for the office door. Nothing fancy. Just her name and the years she lived. Every morning I walked past it before I unlocked the door, and every morning it still catches me a little, seeing her name on something that's going to outlast both of us. Ashley and I started getting lunch together every few weeks. Nothing formal, just a diner near the foundation office with pie that Denise would have approved of. The first time, she spent most of the meal apologizing all over again, even though I'd already told her more than once there was nothing for her to apologize for. "I keep thinking I should have done more," she said, pushing eggs around her plate. "I keep thinking I should have just called upstairs myself instead of asking permission." "You were 28 years old and new," I told her. I was 51, and it still took a police officer and an elevator to fix what one phone call should have. "If anybody in that building owes an apology, Ashley, it was never you." She laughed a little at that. The first real laugh I'd heard out of her since everything happened, and something in her shoulders came down. Over the following months, I watched her grow into that new client advocacy role like it had been custom built for her, because in a lot of ways it had. She started keeping a small notebook of every complaint that came across her desk, not just logging them, but following up personally, calling clients back herself instead of letting it disappear into a queue. She told me once that she thought about that morning every single time she picked up the phone, and that it kept her honest in a job that could have easily turned into just another set of boxes to check. I believe her. I've watched her do the job long enough now to know it isn't performance. It's exactly the kind of quiet, stubborn decency Denise used to talk about, showing up in somebody who wasn't even born yet the last time my sister started living by that rule. The first scholarship the Denise Brooks Foundation ever awarded went to a 19-year-old named Tamika Reyes from our old neighborhood, studying to become a labor and delivery nurse, the same specialty Denise spent her whole career in. I insisted on writing that first letter by hand rather than letting the foundation's new staff send something formal and templated. It felt important that the very first letter carry something personal. I told Tamika about my sister, about the blue lunch bag with the broken zipper, the winter coats left quietly in church pews. 30 years of 12-hour shifts, nobody outside our family knew we're sitting on top of a small fortune the whole time. I told her the money funding her education didn't come from someone trying to buy recognition. It came from a woman who gave quietly her whole life and expected nothing back, who wanted someone like Tamika to have one less obstacle between her and the life she was capable of building. Tamika wrote back a few weeks later. She told me she'd cried reading it twice, once alone in her dorm room and once on the phone with her grandmother. She told me she was going to specialize in labor and delivery because of what I'd written about Denise. I keep that letter in the same drawer where I keep Denise's old nursing badge, the one from her very first job, the one she never threw away even after she stopped needing it. 11 students received funding from the foundation that first year alone. Every one of them got a letter in my own handwriting. Tamika Reyes called me herself a few weeks after the letter on a Sunday evening when I was halfway through washing dishes. "I hope it's okay I got your number from the foundation office," she said, sounding nervous in a way that made me smile. "Of course it's okay," I told her, drying my hands on a towel and sitting down at the kitchen table. How are you settling in? She told me about her dorm, about a professor who'd already started calling on her by name because she was the only one in class who'd actually worked a hospital shift before, volunteering at 16 alongside an aunt who was a home health aide. I keep thinking about what you wrote, she said, about your sister never wanting credit. I don't think I understood people could be like that. Just quietly good. For no reason. Forever. She'd tell you it wasn't for no reason, I said. She'd tell you it was for exactly this. For you calling somebody on a Sunday, asking questions instead of being too scared to ask them. Can I tell you something kind of embarrassing? She said. I practiced what I was going to say on this call for like 20 minutes. That's not embarrassing, I told her. That's just what it feels like to care about getting something right. I know that feeling pretty well myself. We talked for almost an hour that night, mostly about nursing school, a little about Denise. And when I hung up the phone, I sat at that kitchen table a long while, thinking that this, exactly this, was what my sister had been picturing all those years she was quietly reinvesting money nobody knew she had. About a week after a quarterly update at Harlow and Vance, I drove out to the small cemetery on the south side of the city where we buried Denise next to our mother. I don't visit as often as I probably should. It's still hard for me to stand in that particular quiet and not feel the whole weight of missing her all over again. But I wanted her to know it was done. Not just the money, though I told her that too. My hand resting on the top of her headstone the way it used to rest on her shoulder when she was sick and needed steadying. I told her about Tamika, about Ashley, and about Curtis Odom, who'd tried in the one small way available to him to stop what was happening. I told her about Gregory Pierce, too, because I think Denise would have wanted the whole story, not just the parts that made her look good. You would not believe what they put me through, I said, half laughing, half something closer to tears. Tore up the paperwork. Called the police on me. Can you believe that? And you were right the whole time. The truth caught up to the room. It just took a little longer than usual. I stood there a long while, watching the wind move through the trees, thinking about a woman who spent 30 years hiding an extraordinary gift inside an ordinary life just so she could give every bit of it away exactly the way she wanted. On her own terms, without anyone's permission. I kept my promise, I told her one more time, because some things are worth saying twice. I kept it. Then I got back in my old Toyota, cracked windshield and all, and drove home the way I'd driven every day of my life before any of this happened. Steady, unhurried, exactly myself. Word got back to my old community center before I ever said a word about it myself. The way news does in a neighborhood where everybody's still connected to everybody. A few of the kids I used to help with their reading, grown now, some with kids of their own, started stopping by just to talk, half curious and half proud in a way that caught me off guard. Ms. Naomi, that was really you? One of them, a young man named Darius, who used to struggle with word problems more than reading itself, asked me outside the corner store. In the news and everything? I told him it was, and that I hadn't planned on it being news at all. That it just turned out that way. You used to tell us, he said, that people are gonna underestimate you your whole life, and the only thing you can control is proving them wrong on your own timeline, not theirs. I didn't remember saying that exact sentence, but it sounded enough like something I would have said that I didn't argue with him about it. It's a strange thing, hearing your own old advice handed back to you by someone who actually held on to it. I think that's the part of this whole story that still catches me off guard the most. More than the money, more than the lobby, more than any of it. Not that a promise got kept, but that somewhere along the way, without me fully realizing it, the way I moved through the world had already been teaching a lesson long before I ever needed $22 million to prove it. On the 1-year anniversary of the foundation, we held a small dinner. Nothing extravagant, just the 11 scholarship students, Renee Ashford, Ashley Mercer, and a handful of people from our old neighborhood who'd known Denise back when she was just the girl with the blue lunch bag and not a name on a brass plate. Tamika Reyes stood up partway through the meal, nervous, holding a napkin like it might steady her hands, and said she wanted to say something. "I didn't know people like Denise Brooks existed," she said. "Somebody who could have had anything and chose a Honda with a broken door instead. I used to think you had to choose between being generous and being smart with money. She proved you don't have to choose." A few people around the table were crying by the time she sat back down, myself included. I hadn't planned on speaking, but I found myself standing anyway, glass in hand, looking around a room full of people my sister never got to meet but had somehow still managed to change. "She used to tell me that consistency beats a big paycheck every time," I said. "I used to think she just meant money. I understand now she meant everything. Who you are on an ordinary Tuesday is who you actually are. Everything else is just what people happen to be watching." I raised my glass to a woman who spent 30 years being extraordinary in complete silence, and for once the whole room got to be loud about it for her. People ask if I'm going to get rid of the Toyota now, buy something that matches the numbers sitting in my accounts. I always tell them the same thing. That truck isn't a costume I wear to hide what I have. It's just who I am. It got me to work for 15 years. It got me to the hospital every day during my sister's last few months. It got me downtown that morning, carrying a promise I intended to keep no matter how anybody in a marble lobby decided to treat me for it. Here's what I've learned. And it's the only thing I really want you to take with you. People are going to look at you and decide things. Sometimes those decisions are generous. More often, especially if you don't fit whatever picture they've built in their heads of who deserves respect, those decisions are small, unfair, and said out loud like they're simply facts. You can't control that. I couldn't, standing in that lobby with a folder full of torn paper and a police officer at my side. What you can control is whether you let somebody else's assumption about you become the truth you carry. I didn't. Denise never did either. Not for one single day of her quiet, extraordinary life. Dignity was never something that man in the expensive watch had the power to take from me. He could tear paper. He could call the police. He could stand in that lobby and decide out loud in front of everyone exactly what he thought I was. He was wrong, and who I am was never his to decide in the first place. I think about Gregory Pierce sometimes still, not with anger anymore, just as a reminder of how easily somebody can build an entire judgment out of nothing more than a windshield crack and a cardigan, and how expensive that mistake can end up being. Not just in dollars, though it certainly was that. In the kind of dignity you can't buy back once you've thrown it away in front of a room full of witnesses. I think about Denise more, though, and about Ashley, and Curtis, and Officer Delgado, and Tamika, and every person in between who chose, in ways big or small, to do the harder right thing instead of the easier quiet one. That's really the whole story, if you boil it all the way down. Not a lobby, not a fortune, not even a promise. Just people deciding over and over in small moments nobody was going to remember exactly who they wanted to be. My name is Naomi Brooks, and I kept my promise.
Would you forgive Gregory? Tell us below. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell.